Well, sometimes it seems like this word doubt in churches is kind of a dirty word. We're not really supposed to talk about it. We're not really supposed to struggle with doubts. And so one of the things for me when I was younger, as I was growing up in church, that kind of frustrated me is it seemed like we weren't allowed to doubt. You weren't allowed to question things. You weren't allowed to wonder things. And so one of the reasons that I'm really excited about sharing with you this morning and being able to preach this morning is because I don't want our community, the Worship Cafe, to be marked by that. I want us to be able to move through and wrestle through doubts together. And so today I want to give us a different perspective on doubts. And I want to shift from considering doubt this dirty word that we're not supposed to talk about in church, and instead to start to look at it as a holy necessity that we have. And it's my hope that as we leave here together today, that we can leave a little more open, a little more honest with each other about the questions that we have and the struggles and doubts that we all face. Earlier in the service, we sang this song, "It Is Well With My Soul." And I love this song because it has this honesty to it, right? And it gives us this picture of what the Christian faith should look like. When sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And sometimes I think that we've been told that we should never experience waves of doubt. And if we do, that there's something wrong with us in church. But I think, sadly, this is really just a wrong understanding of Scripture and a wrong understanding of the role of doubt in our faith. And so today I want to look at and move through how we move through these waves of doubt and these questions and these storms that are going to happen in our lives. Maybe you were here last week, and if you were here last week, you know that my wife Laura ran her very first marathon. Go Laura, right? And so she ran the Pittsburgh Marathon, all 26.2 miles of it last week. And so after months and months of training, and a lot of Kevin watching the kids while she was out running, and literally years of dreaming for her to do this, she finally was able to do it last week. And so I was so excited for her. I was here kind of running the Worship Cafe service, and she was running a marathon, and so I was really, really glad that I was getting these text message updates throughout. And so when she hit the halfway mark, I got a text message saying that she was there. And so she was doing really, really well running this marathon. Until she hit 2 miles left. She was only 2 miles left, and she started getting these leg cramps that were so bad that she just couldn't walk, she couldn't move, she couldn't do anything. And she sent me a text message, and she said, "Kevin, can you pray for me? Because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it. I literally can't move my legs right now." And I was just struggling because I wish that I could be there with my wife, and I wish that I could encourage her. I wish I could tell her to get up, it was going to be okay. But I couldn't. I was here, and so I prayed really, really hard. And at the end of the service, I got up, and I still didn't know what was going on with her. And so I just wanted to tell the Worship Cafe, I just said, "Guys, this is the situation. Laura's 2 miles away, and she's really having a hard time. Will you pray with me right now as we close the service?" And so we all prayed together for Laura, and in that exact moment, as I said amen, I got a text message saying she had successfully completed her marathon. It was like really miraculous, the timing of this. And everyone cheered, and it was really exciting. But maybe you feel a little bit like Laura did last week. You're trying to run this race of faith in your life, but sometimes you have doubts and you question if you're even going to be able to finish the race. See, the truth is, guys, that we all have moments of doubt in our lives. We're all going to move through a moment of doubt in our lives, and maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you come to church, but if you're to be honest, you actually feel like you have more questions than you do have answers about faith and life with Christ. Maybe you're on the other side. Maybe for you, faith has never really been an issue. Doubt has never really been an issue for you. It's pretty easy. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter where you are. There's a point in our lives where we're going to doubt, and doubt is just a part of our faith journey together. In fact, if you look at Scripture, you'll see that all kinds of people in Scripture doubted things. In fact, it's almost every major person in the book of the Scriptures has moved through doubt at some point in their lives. And so you see John the Baptist, who is probably one of the most pious people that you can imagine. And he actually went to prison for his belief in Jesus Christ. And then in this moment of doubt in prison, he says, "You know what? Jesus, are you the expected one? Or should I look for someone else?" This moment of doubt that he has. Abraham, he doubted, and he had a child by his servant instead, right? And Sarah doubted God and actually laughed in his face whenever she was promised a child. Moses had one incredible, amazing story, faith-building story after another as he grew in his life. And yet there's this moment in his life where God tells him, I'm going to feed your army. And Moses says, yeah, I don't think so. I doubt that. And yet he doubted after all these stories that he had. Gideon doubted whether he would be the warrior that God said that he would be. Job had all these moments of doubt. He said, God, are you even hearing my prayers and my cries? And all of the disciples, if you look at them, have moments where they're doubting Jesus and what are you doing here? And so, when you look at all of that, it's just a little bit strange that people act surprised whenever people have doubt. It's a little strange when we pretend that doubt isn't part of our faith journey together. And instead, I want us to turn and have a different perspective. And this is, I want to read this right now. This is, doubt is not forbidden, but is encouraged as a journey where we bring our doubts to God and ask Him for wisdom to evaluate and judge competing ideas and convictions. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. And so when we read this, no wonder the book of Jude says something like this: be merciful to those who have doubt. Be merciful to those. So if doubt is actually a holy necessity, what are we to do with all these doubts and questions that we have? Are we just supposed to ask God for wisdom and wait? Are we supposed to tell people that are doubting, just believe a little bit harder and you'll figure it out? Well, if you've been in moments of doubt in your life, you know it's not that simple. And maybe we can unpack this idea by looking at something else that's not that simple. The trash cans at Whole Foods. And for those of you that are laughing, you know what I'm talking about. Have you ever eaten a meal at Whole Foods or something similar and you find yourself looking at something like this? And you're just kind of paralyzed. You're like, I don't even know what to do. There's so many different places to put things. And I find myself, I'm looking at this and I'm just terrified sometimes. I'm terrified I'm accidentally going to put plastic in the trash bin and people are going to think that I don't like the environment. But I really do like the environment. I want to recycle things too, but people are going to look at me disapprovingly. And it gets really complicated and difficult sometimes. And so you walk to this trash bin and your arms are weighed down with all this stuff. And you know, most of the stuff in your arms, you don't have to throw it away. Most of it can be composted or recycled, and there's only this very small amount of stuff that you probably have that would actually be thrown away as trash. Everything else has its place. And it's just like this with our doubts. You know, when we come, and when it comes to faith and doubt, and we have all these questions that weigh down our arms, and some of you might have more questions than others in this room. But what we've been told so often as we go through our lives is that we're unfaithful if we have these questions, and that they should all be thrown away. It doesn't matter what the question is. And they're discarded as trash, and they have no place in our faith journey. But I just disagree with that. That's not true. Far too many of us have come weighed down with questions, and we've been paralyzed as we've been standing with good, honest questions for God and for the faith that we have. And instead of discarding all of these questions, what we actually need to do is sort through and process them and find the right place for them. And so, in fact, if you were to study the word doubt in Scripture, which is diakrino, it means literally to separate, distinguish, judge, or evaluate ideas. And so we have this holy necessity that again and again is shown in Scriptures to doubt and to process the beliefs that we all have in our lives. And so while some of these questions could be discarded, some of them actually probably aren't really worth asking, there's very few of those questions. I mean, maybe one question that could be discarded is, could God create a rock that's so heavy that He would be unable to actually pick that rock up? Very deep question. But you could probably toss that question. It's really not that important of a question, right? But there's lots of really good questions that we need to sort through and we need to understand. And so when we come with our arms loaded with questions, we need to find ways to separate them wisely and handle those questions, one question differently from another. So I want to give you a framework to do that today. I'm going to give you 3 categories to look at. And the first one is the secret things. And these things are things that only belong to God and that only God has full and complete answers to. And so these are things that you can look at lots of different scriptures at this, but this is one scripture that really nails it. And this is Deuteronomy 29:29 that says, secret things belong to the Lord our God. But the things that were revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. And so if you have doubts or questions in this area, you're going to eventually reach a limit where you're just not going to be able to ask any more questions or get any more answers. I mean, things like the mystery of the Trinity would fall into this category. Or maybe like the way that our free will interacts with God's divine foreknowledge. And that you can gain some answers, and you can look and you can read lots of books and you can study for the rest of your life, but there's going to be a limit to what you know. And if you're intellectually minded and you want to dig into those books, I recommend them. I think that they can be edifying. I think they can be worthwhile. But you have to look at it with a different perspective, understanding that these are secret things that have a limit. The next category, number 2, is essential things. And these are things that are integral to the Christian faith, that are at a very basic level, and that we must understand them and we must dig deeper into these things. And these things include all the essential elements of the Christian faith, the things that we really build our faith on. And the Apostle Paul describes these essentials like this in 1 Corinthians 15, starting with verse 1. Now I would remind you, brothers of the gospel, Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. And so if you have doubts on questions of the essentials of the faith, I would just encourage you to have conversations, to talk about them, and there's some really good answers to those questions. But you have to really dig and you have to look at them, and that's very important. The next one is the intramural things of the faith. And these are aspects of the faith that really only insiders care about and are concerned with. And we can look at them and we should study them, but we have to have perspective that they're unessential to the faith in the sense that your salvation is not really determined by them. And so Paul says it like this: I've decided to know nothing except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Paul, no doubt, he had all kinds of conversations with the Corinthians, and in fact, in the same book as he wrote in that passage. But, as he looks at things like ethics and behavior and the ways that you're supposed to worship, the one thing that he actually dug his heels in on were the essentials of the faith, not the intramurals. And then the last thing that you have here is this area in the middle. If you understand how a Venn diagram works, is that area in the middle, the tension area of our faith and our questions. And sometimes we have questions that are just landing in this tension area, and so we need to find ourselves, when we find ourselves there, we need to move through them despite the waves of questions that we have. And we need to have discernment and determination to continue to pursue God, even in the tension and the questions that we have. And when we find ourselves in this area, we need to find ways to discern, to sort these things, and find out where they might fit. And so Hebrews 11 gives us a little bit of a perspective on this. And it says this: Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Many of you might be familiar with a different translation of this passage where it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. And indeed, if you look at the Greek word substance, which is hypostasis, it literally has this meaning, the structure or the things which things stand on. And so faith is the substructure that allows us to have confidence and certainty in our lives. And so confidence, if you think about it, is this feeling that we have. That's not what our faith is built on. No, our faith is built on the substance and the essentials of the faith, and that don't change with circumstances. And so our faith should be built on these things so that even whenever something bad happens or something difficult happens in our lives, we can still consider it pure joy and be able to have hope. And this substance of our faith, we need to build on the essential categories. Christ's death and his resurrection, those are the things that our faith need to be built on. Now, an example of this, someone that built their life on the essentials of the faith, is Thomas. Now, you guys probably know Thomas as Doubting Thomas. Thomas became famous whenever, after Jesus was resurrected in the upper room, he doubted Christ if he actually had returned. He just didn't believe it, right? And so it's interesting, though, if you look at this idea or this story in the context of who Thomas is and the rest of Scriptures, you see that Thomas earlier is brave and courageous again and again. If you look at the life of Thomas, he was willing to die for his friend Lazarus, and he stepped up with his great zeal and said, I'm willing to die for him. Another time, he would be the only person that was willing to ask Jesus a direct question. All the other disciples were silent, and Thomas was the one that was willing to pipe up and ask a question that needed to be asked. Yet when the disciples were in the upper room and Jesus came, Thomas was not there after the resurrection. And so Thomas hears this amazing story of the resurrection of Christ, and he just has some doubts. In fact, he just straight out does not believe this at all. In fact, he just says, I'm not sure what to do with this. And so where would you put Thomas's doubts if you were to categorize it in those buckets that we talked about? Well, Thomas is doubting an essential of the faith. This is the core of the Christian faith right here. It's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so this is very important. And so I wonder, if we look at this, what that scene must have looked like. Have you ever thought about that? What it might have been like if you were in the room with Thomas as he was doubting this and he was questioning this. And then that encounter that he has with Jesus eventually. What would it have been like? You know, a Baroque artist, Caravaggio, painted a scene which gives us a picture of what this might have been like. And it's entitled The Incredulity of St. Thomas. And so you can see this picture right here. This is the image of this. And so this is really showing a state of disbelief. That's what the title of this painting actually alludes to. It's a state of disbelief. Now, as you look at this, what are you drawn to in this painting? Just notice the graphic way that Thomas is examining Jesus just days removed from the cross and the grave. And what I want you to think about as you think about this moment with Thomas and Jesus face to face is that Thomas wasn't met with Jesus with anger or frustration. Jesus didn't say, how didn't you believe me? What's wrong with you? No, Jesus met Thomas with love and with compassion. And he said, you know what, that's okay. You can examine me, you can look at me, you can ask me questions. And so this act of Jesus, just a few days removed from him hanging naked on a cross, is another act of vulnerability and humiliation, where he literally disrobes and allows a doubting man to examine him. See, God makes himself vulnerable in the resurrection, vulnerable to our doubts, and vulnerable to our fingers forced through his wound over and over. And he knows that his love needs to extend even to our fears and our broken places, and that we need to be reminded of that in our lives. And so that's why I say it's important to be brave enough to approach Jesus and ask him these questions. So based on all that we know about Thomas, if you really look at his life and even this act in the context of who he is in the rest of Scripture, you see that this is not just an act of doubt. This is really an act of courage. At least Thomas was courageous enough to admit that he had questions and doubts about this miraculous thing that had happened. And this doubt, and then the examining, and then the faith that he had as a result of that eventually helped him and sustained him for the balance of his life as he moved through from this point forward. In fact, he traveled after this 1,800 miles to India. He practiced carpentry like Jesus. He shared his faith with whoever would listen in that moment, and he planted churches every time someone that would respond. Eventually, Thomas was martyred by a tribal chief with a spear in 72 AD. And with this final act, we see that he wasn't doubting Thomas, but he was actually courageous Thomas. So what are your doubts today? What are the things that you think about but you just never give voice to in your life? You know, if we aren't able to answer your questions or to have dialogue about your questions, then the church could become the ultimate arrogant place. A place that doesn't allow for conversation. A place that doesn't allow for dialogue. A place where people from the outside might view us as faith robots that just simply never have questions or wonder about things in our lives. So what if our church, what if the worship cafe even, were to become a safe place for people to exhibit their courage, to wrestle openly, and to seek wisdom about who Jesus is? What if our church took Jesus seriously in his invitation to investigate and to ask questions and even to judge him despite the fact that he's ultimately our judge? So how do we do that? I want to give you just a few really practical things right now as we're starting to wrap up. And the first one is a discipling relationship. And so I'm just going to encourage you that if you have a lot of questions about your faith, get into a one-on-one relationship with another believer. There's so many people here in the Worship Cafe that would love to interact with you, that would love to answer those questions, that would love to walk with you in those doubts and help you evaluate where you are in those things. The second one is prepare. That perhaps if you're in this question kind of mode and you're just not sure about these things and you're brand new to the faith and you're questioning the essential things of the faith and you really just want to understand creation, fall, restoration, redemption, that you can have these one-on-one conversations with people and actually move through the prepare curriculum, or we can just have a conversation, we can get you into a class. Just talk to me about that. I would love to have that conversation with you. And then the third thing is this community. I just think it's impossible to navigate these questions alone. And I think that's what happens so often. I think that we go through and we have questions, we think we're the only ones, and we go and we wrestle with these things alone. But I want to say, look around Worship Cafe. There's so many people here that would love to talk to you and that would love to interact with you. And then lastly, I want to say that if you're just not struggling with doubt in your life right now, perhaps you're in a different space, I just want to say, would you help us answer these questions? Would you help us be a person that other people could go to and have conversations with? I'd just like to close with a story. A few years back, my family, we went to a place called Dutch Wonderland, and it's in Maryland, and it's a theme park that's created for little people in mind, right? And so there's all kinds of fun rides and things to do for little ones. And eventually, as we were at this Dutch Wonderland theme park with Julia and Declan, we came to this slide. It's called the Silo Slide, and it's ginormous. It's really, really big. And Julia normally would look at something like this and she would say, "No, that's too big, that's too scary, Dad, I don't want to do that, Daddy." And so she looked at this, though, for whatever reason on this day and was feeling really brave and said, "Yeah, I want to go, I want to give it a shot." And so me being Dad of the Year said, "Yeah, go for it, sounds good." And so as she stepped into this little door right here, I started to get a little bit nervous inside. Because as I looked inside this little silo slide thing here, there was this very steep staircase that was very, very high, all the way up to the top there, packed with like 30 or 40 unsupervised, sugar-filled kids that were pushing each other all the way up to the top of the very staircase. It looked super unsafe to me, actually, to be honest with you. And so as I watched Julia slowly, smiling, going up the stairs, and I'm like trying to act really cool, like, "Hey, honey," but I'm freaking out inside, okay? That's the truth. I'm freaking out inside. And so eventually she seems like she should have been down the slide. Like, I'm like, "Hey, didn't that girl go in after her? I don't know where she is." And I'm starting to get a little bit apprehensive. I'm starting to get a little bit worried. It seems like she's taking a really long time. And suddenly I hear a cry, and it's definitely Julia coming from the very top of the slide. And I'm like, "Julia, what's wrong, honey? What's going on?" And she says, "Daddy, I can't go down. It's too scary." She says this in the midst of sobs. And I can't see her, but I can tell she's frightened, and I can tell she's scared, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do here. And so I talk to the attendant, and she says that I'm allowed to go up, but I'm not allowed to go down the slide, but I can go up. And so I threw some kids, out of the way. I didn't do that, but I got up to the top of the slide, and I went up the crazy staircase, and I saw Julia there, and she's shaking, and she's afraid, and she says, "Dad, I can't do it. I can't go down the slide." And I said, "Julia, honey, I can't go down with you, but can you just go down? Mommy and Daddy are going to be at the end of the slide. I promise. We'll be right there at the end. Can you do it?" And eventually she gets just a little bit braver, and she decides to push off and go down the slide. And sure enough, Laura and I were there at the end of the slide, and we gave her a big hug and assured her that we still loved her. And I just want to say, sometimes I feel like as we're struggling with doubts, we feel like Julia did at the very top of that slide. We feel like we're alone. We feel like no one else knows the questions that we have, the struggles that we're going through. And we feel like maybe we want to cry out, but no one's even hearing us. I just want to say, Worship Cafe, if we can walk through this together, if you look around and we realize that we're a community that's going to walk through the doubts and the questions that we all have together, it's going to be a better place for us all. And so I want to say that as you have the courage to go through that slide, to move through those waves, to move through that storm of doubt in our lives, that at the end, God is going to be there with open arms. Let's pray. Lord, you are so good, and I'm just amazed by your love and your care for us, Lord. I'm amazed that you were willing to open your arms and allow us to examine you. Allow us to ask you those questions and to see who you really are, Lord. I just pray we'd have the courage to ask those questions, that we would have the courage to approach you in those moments, Lord. And that we know that as we ask those questions, that just like that image of Julia coming down the slide, you have open arms. Open arms that allow us to ask the questions, and open arms that when we get to the end of the questions, that you're there and that you love us and you care for us, despite the questions and concerns and doubts that we might have in our lives. Lord, I just pray that the Worship Cafe would be a community that would be marked by an openness and a willingness to ask these questions, to be honest about these questions, but Lord, most of all, that we would be marked by a community that would just answer those questions in a faithful way. That we would love each other through those doubts and those questions, Lord, and that people would see that, and that we would see your love in the midst of that, Lord. So Lord, I just thank you for this group. I thank you for what you're doing in our lives, and I thank you that we can walk through this together, that we're not alone, and that makes all the difference. In the name of the one who is willing to allow us to examine him, amen.